Thanks everyone for coming. Like Annie said, we are small but mighty, so let's just have a good chat. My name is Camille Laganza, and I'm an artistic recruiter at Netflix Animation. I work from home here in Seattle, so just coming from the other side, but super excited to talk with Brian Schmidt. You've been doing so much work over the past couple of decades in sound design and gaming. Just thrilled to meet you
Thank
today.
you so much.
And chat. But I did want to just go over a couple of things on your bio because it's amazing. So let's see. So you received the Lifetime Achievement Award, and you're a 2017 inductee into the Pinball Expo Hall of Fame. You're a composer and sound designer on over 140 console and arcade games, including several years of John Madden Football, EA's Desert Strike series, Mutant Football League, Game of Thrones pinball, so many different things. You were also the founder and executive director of Game Sound Con. And I was very excited about the Pixies connection myself. I'm going to ask you about that later. But I wanted to just ask you, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how music came into your life and how sound design became your career.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's we were saying before earlier, you don't really realize until later on that your career and your life is this thing you just kind of make up as you go along. So I was a child of two music teachers, two public school music teachers. So that kind of had music kind of in my life from early on. And I played in a rock band in high school and bands and magical groups and things like that. But then I decided, I wanted to actually be a music major. So I went to school at Northwestern, which is just outside Chicago, thinking tuba performance, that's kind of what I want to do. I also play bass guitar, and I realized that, symphony is really not, there are like only a couple symphonies. Like there's one tuba player in a symphony, and all the symphonies in the world have these really young tuba players, so there weren't going to be a lot of jobs there. But I did think...
So you were playing tuba?
I was playing tuba,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But I did know I wanted to play and perform, and so studio work is kind of actually what I want. Well, what I really wanted to do was be a rock and roll star. That was number one career goal.
We do.
But two was to be what's called a session player, and a session player is somebody who, shows up in the studio, has some music they've never seen before, whether it's for a television commercial or a TV show or a film or something like that, and just plays it, and then you're done and you're out and you're on to the next thing. But then when I was in college, just by serendipity, the School of Music had gotten this grant to do computer music, which this was back in '82, so before, like MIDI literally didn't exist back then, much less, all the cool tools that we have now. So I just totally fell in love with music technology, to the point where in addition to getting a music degree, I also got a computer science degree on the side, and then decided to get my master's degree in that, in sort of computer applications in music. So yeah, I was positive I wanted to be a performer or a session musician, and then just all of a sudden, this other thing, and that was 40 years ago. Wow. And yeah, that changed my whole life's trajectory, just that happenstance of being at a school that happened to have this big grant that they got to add computers to their music department. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of life just sort of happens without a detailed plan.
That's really interesting. So, I'm imagining in 1982, just because my dad graduated with a computer science degree around this time, there weren't that many programs out there for computer science. It was a real fledgling.
Yeah, this really dates me. Is that my first programming class at Northwestern? I used punch cards, which were these. When you see, they're about this big, and they've got little holes in them that say what the letters are, and so yeah, that was a while ago. That's
interesting. Well, and I wondered, was there I mean, you got your degree, you moved on, but what was the first game you actually worked on?
So I was finishing my master's. I actually hadn't finished it yet. I had taken all my coursework and was doing my thesis. And kind of out of the blue, this job dropped in my lap, which I feel terrible for the people now who want to get into games, that they're so competitive. There was an arcade game company in Chicago called Williams Electronic Games, and they were looking specifically for somebody who could write music and had an ear, but also could write low-level computer programs, because back then, literally, in order to be able to do music for games, you had to also be able to write computer code. So, and I grew up playing pinball. I used to ride my bike to the arcade, and I used to waste my allowance, according to my mom. I wasted my allowance playing pinball. And so the idea of working at a pinball company and then doing music and doing the tech stuff was like, wow, this is really cool. So that, so the very, very first game I worked on was a pinball machine called Fire, and I just did like some random sound effects for it. One of which was a breaking glass sound. And so one of my first, within the first couple of weeks, I was in the studio wearing goggles and a mask with a, microphone and shattering bits of, shattering a pane of glass and shattering a big window and a little window, making this huge mess. And we went to clean it up and realized that the pinball factory was actually a union house, a union factory. What that meant was that since I wasn't a union member of the whatever organization does the custodial work, that I could not clean up this big mess that we had made. And so I felt really bad about that. But
Fire, was it like a physical pinball machine?
yeah, this is all physical pinballs, the big ones. And the factory was there, so literally I could walk down the hallway and see 250 people with soldering irons and screwdrivers and putting together the physical pinball machines.
Do you miss that?
I miss it a lot. Yeah, it was really fun.
I love pinball. Who likes pinball?
Yeah, good.
See?
Yeah, pinball's had actually quite a bit of a renaissance the last about 7 or 8 years. It kind of goes in cycles, and I happened to hit it in the late 80s on a big upcycle.
Have you worked on any recently?
I did Game of Thrones a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So I did all the music for the Game of Thrones machine. A lot of them are licensed now, so that was pretty fun. Writing a bunch of, it was about 25 or 30 minutes of music in the style of Game of Thrones.
That's awesome. I love that. What is the, like for pinball, and when you were writing music for that, what was your process? Like how do you go into that kind of physical game, thinking about the music and like the immersiveness of it and just the joy that you're giving in that game playing experience? Yeah,
pinball was interesting because I like to think of pinball as the original casual game, right? These days there's lots of different categories of video games, right? There's the shooters, there's the MMOs, there's RPGs, right? There's all these different styles of video game, and one of them is casual, right? A casual game is a game typically on your smartphone, like Candy Crush or Harry Potter Puppet Pals or whatever it happens to be. So they're little bite-sized pieces of entertainment. They're not these long story-based games. And so pinball was very much a sort of a casual game. And I was surprised when I got to Williams that I was just at the time where they were able to start putting what could be called actual music into a pinball machine. A typical game would have maybe 20 to 25 minutes of music in it. And that's stuff you can write down on music paper and have somebody play, not just sort of the ding ding dings and things like that. So yeah, there's two sides of it. There's sort of what's the creative side and what's the technical side. And the creative side was always, okay, let's work with the designer. What's the art look like? Because you always want to make sure the musical style matches the art style, and so aesthetically it's a coherent package. Is it a cute, funsy, cutie game? Is it a macho game? Is it a scary game? So yeah, work with that and try and write some themes and do some prototypes that, run it past the game designer and see if they like it. And they're like, yeah, that sucks. No, or, oh yeah, that's quite good. That's what I was thinking. So then you'd have the ideas. And I would always write my music on music paper. That's just how I compose. I take a pencil and an eraser and blank music paper, and I kind of write it out. And then there's the sort of technical step. And back then, this has changed a lot in games in the last, 3 decades. I literally would simply put my music paper here, and I had a PC, and in a text editor, for every note I had on my music paper, I would have to literally type the word NOTE, and then space, and then whatever the pitch was, and what the duration was, and what the volume was. So it's sort of transcribing it from music notation into this computer language that we kind of had developed to describe music. And then, type some computer commands, and now it is in the game.
Wow. How does that work now?
Now, if you have the money, you fly to Abbey Road, record the London Philharmonic, get in the 40-piece choir, and you bring the recording back and you stick it in the game. So it's a little different than it used to be.
No more NOTE.
No more NOT, although there's still a lot of very technical aspects to game audio. That's one of the big differences between sort of film music and game music.
Well, let's talk about that. Because I come from the world of film,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm just curious, like when you're approaching a project, like how is it different than a film? What are some of the differences? Yeah,
the most fundamental difference is, right, if you're doing music for film or television or YouTube short or something, it's not easy, but it's relatively straightforward, right? You have a linear piece of film, and you're mapping onto it a linear piece of music. Mm-hmm. I'm not a film person, but I was an assistant to a composer who did films back in Chicago. And one of the things that I did is I would watch, the short films that we were doing and map out when in time certain events happened. And then I'd put those on a blank piece of music paper for the composer, and he could write the music knowing that, okay, at this time, the scene changes. At this time, Ronald McDonald falls out of bed, things like that. So it's very straightforward. You have perfect precognition of, if you're doing a feature film, the next 2 hours. In a game, from the first instant, you have no idea when or what might happen. Well, there are constraints about what can happen, right? If I'm playing Destiny, I know that I'm not going to have kitty cats in it, so I don't have to worry about kitty cat sounds. But of all the things that the game can do, I have no idea when they might do those, or if the player will actually get to a point where something happens. So now we have this challenge that games are an inherently nonlinear medium. They're kind of all over the place. But music, when I go to Abbey Roads and record, I've never been to Abbey Road recording, but that's where they do it now.
Living the dream.
Then you come back with these linear pieces of music. And so how do I map these linear things into this nonlinear thing? It's almost like putting a square peg in a round hole. And so over the years, and we're still kind of figuring it out. That's one of the fun things about game sound, is that we're still making this all up. But what we've developed are these various kinds of techniques where if you compose the music in a certain way and break it apart in a certain way, then you can kind of reassemble it as the game is being played based upon what's going on. So the trick is to give the illusion of perfect precognition for this gameplay experience that hasn't happened yet, even though you don't know when things are going to go. And some of the easy things are, without getting too much into the musical tech, is, right, if you have a piece of music that's exploring music and a piece of music that's battle music, I don't want to just stop playing the exploring and start playing the battle. Like, film composer would never do that. They'd write some sort of little musical transition that's smoothly and without the audience even realizing it, is now reflective of the new mood that the composer wants the player to have. And so we have these tools that say, okay, let's say when the music gets a message that we're going from exploring state to combat state, let me cue up this next piece of music, but let me wait until the musical measure is over. Or let me subtly add in 2 new tracks to this existing piece of music, which kind of change the mood of it. So we have these different kind of techniques that we do. Or, let me write out a little 3-beat transition from this piece to this piece, and just kind of have it smoothly take the player there. So all these kind of different things. But the fundamental is music's inherently linear, games are inherently nonlinear. Putting that square peg in the round hole is kind of the challenge.
Yeah.
And the fun.
Oh, I'm curious, since this is TECHtober and we're kind of talking about art and technology, when you look at your career, I mean, there are so many technical things that you have to figure out, but then that musical side is so creative. Like, how do you look at your career and what, like, where do you feel like you land on that kind of spectrum? And
it depends what day you catch me, sort of, or what decade.
Where are you now?
Where am I now? It kind of depends on the day. Right now, Game Sound Con is in 3.5 weeks, and so that's kind of occupying my brain. So I'm in the, believe it or not, it has nothing to do with music or tech. It's like, how many bagels do I need to order for breakfast for people? I just a couple days ago finished a promotional short for Mutant Football League, which was just a pretty straightforward video, put music to it, put all the sound design to it, and get that done in a day. It kind of depends. It's funny. It's because again, video games are very technical. There's lots of, in order to take that round peg and put it in that square hole, takes a lot of technology. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to bring to people are cool, interesting, emotional experiences and entertainment and art. And so it's sometimes easy to find ourselves so enamored by the tech, we lose sight that, no, what really matters is there's somebody writing really good music. Today's game composers are just spectacular. They can write circles around me. I'm pretty good, but I'm not like the top shelf people doing Call of Duty or Destiny or people like that. They are really great at making awesome music, and now they work with people who kind of help them, manage the tech bits of it and help them, again, put that square peg in the round hole. So it kind of depends. Again, it's really easy to just get so into the tech. It's like, oh, look at this cool interactive music system, and it does this, and it does this, and it does this. And you have to remember, well, is it serving the game? Is it creating an exciting experience? So I kind of find myself fighting each other sometimes on that.
That's interesting. When you look back at your career, if you go back to kind of your early days, how do you think you would feel if you knew kind of where you've ended up? Like, do you think, like, would you have forecast this at all? I mean, I think there have been so many technological changes over the past couple of decades. Like, could you?
Yeah, there have been, again, literally when I started, it was literally what's called the chiptune age, which is a whole aesthetic, right? The music came out of little synthesizer chips that could only play like 8 notes at a time or 4 notes at a time. And so you had to write within these really in handcuffs, like really constrained about the kinds of sounds they could do. And again, nowadays you just go and you record a great orchestra or a great jazz band or a great rock band and do some stuff. I probably wouldn't have anticipated quite the path, because I loved my job at Williams. It was awesome. And for a reason I still don't quite remember, I quit it after about 2.5 years. I had just done a cool, a arcade game for them called Narc. I did a great pinball machine called Black Knight 2000, which was really super interactive and fun. And I went freelance. And so going freelance probably was the biggest thing that kind of changed.
Where do you think sound design is going to be in 5 years or so, or 10 years for games? Like, because so much has happened in the past.
Yeah, it's
years.
AI is going to certainly have a big impact. In exactly what way, it's hard to tell yet. I mean, the stuff that's going on with DALL-E right now for art, for the visual world, the kind of technologies that they have for voice. Oh my goodness, it's amazingly exciting as a video game sound person. It's terrifying as a citizen. I don't know if you all heard James Earl Jones announce that he was no longer going to be doing the voice of Darth Vader. But what he did was he licensed his voice template. There's technology now that can, if you have a sufficient amount of data from a notable voice speaker, that you can create them saying new things that is virtually indistinguishable from the original actor. Again, as a game sound person, I love that. That's been our holy grail. Because you know, when I was doing early versions of Madden, we would have him saying certain things, and to get the phrase, first and 10, second and 5, second and 4, second and 3, second and 7, second and just like, if I could have somebody who would just create that for me in John Madden or Pat Summerall's voice, that would have been awesome.
Yeah.
That's the holy grail of game sound. But yeah, it has some other somewhat scarier sides to it. So yeah, I think AI is going to be something that definitely changes. Yeah, it's interesting. When I said I first started, you literally had to be quite technical. I literally was doing a kind of programming called assembly language, which is just really, really low level. And then, and the big inflection point was really the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. That's when games stopped shipping on relatively small storage units, right? In arcades or Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, it was cartridges or ROM chips. The original PlayStation and its contemporary, the Sega Saturn, which nobody here remembers because it failed, it was crushed by the original PlayStation. That shipped on compact disc. Games would ship on CDs. But CDs don't actually hold very much. So the game developers filled up these compact discs with, game art and game videos and things like that. But when the PlayStation 2 hit, and a year later the original Xbox, games shipped on DVDs, which hold about 10 times more than a compact disc. And that was when you actually had enough physical storage space. As unsexy as it is, right? The technology that changed the game music industry was just the DVD. It's just like, oh, we can store more data. It wasn't some fancy chip or anything like that. It was just, oh, I got more room now. Now I have room to have an entire video game like Halo and go record the Chicago Symphony making the Halo score. So that was a big, big technological change. And again, it changed not just the technology, but also the business side, because you no longer needed a quirky person like me who could program computers and write music. Now you just got great composers.
Do you have a favorite game?
I always fall back to pinball just because that's what I grew up playing. I just enjoy the visceral feel of it. My son has me playing Destiny. So my daughter's in LA, in Kansas City. My son's in Bellevue, but he has his own apartment, and the three of us will play Destiny online.
That's awesome.
So that's probably the one I'm doing right now.
That's great. I wanted to ask you, when you are brought on to compose for a game, what is that process like? And how are you working with the game developers and just kind of going in to realize that vision?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the game and the size of the studio. The first thing you want to do is just get aligned with the aesthetics. Like what I was talking about for pinball, right? Looking at the artwork. Mm-hmm. Concept art for a video game is important. If you have access to a playable early version, you can get an idea of the feel, what's the mood. Because again, it depends a lot on the kind of game. But in video games, like in film, one of the jobs of music is kind of being the emotional puppeteer. Right? Composers have this ability to sort of take the audience and just pull on their emotional strings like almost nothing else can, even visuals maybe. And Marty O'Donnell, the Halo composer, says, yeah, we're the emotional puppeteer of an experience. So you want to know what do you want the players to be feeling at any given time? Are they feeling triumphant? Are they feeling tense? Are they feeling scared? Are they feeling silly? Are they feeling happy? So yeah, just making sure the aesthetic matches. You probably also want to pick your band. Obviously there's exceptions to every rules, but a lot, is this going to be a game that is done with an orchestra? Or is this going to be a game, a game like Cuphead, which went big band for the whole thing? Or is it all over the place? For Mutant Football League, we're licensing some tracks ranging from hip hop to heavy metal. So kind of doing that. And then it's a matter of, again, unlike film, where you typically work with the finished or near finished product, on a video game, you're basically working with a broken game for months or longer. Yeah. Where you might put a sound in. And again, this is another place where film is much more straightforward. Right? If I know the car crash is 4 minutes, 32.24 seconds, then I can just put my car crash sound right there and I can have the music do a little thing there. In games, we don't have that kind of predictability. In order to make a sound come out in a game, somebody somewhere has to write some code. Whether it's computer code text you would see like in a movie, or whether it's what we call a visual scripting language, where you have boxes that you hook together with lines. Somebody has to write that code. And so you put that thing in so that when the car crash happens, the music changes. And for some random reason, 2 weeks later, that just stops working. And the music doesn't change like it's supposed to, and you have no idea why. It's like, somebody changed something in the way the game displayed the car crash and inadvertently removed the little piece of code that tells the music to change. And so having to deal with that is, so you have to fix those things as they come up. And so you're working on this broken game for a while. And then hopefully, as you get closer to launch, unless you're Cyberpunk 77, you come up with your game and most of those issues are solved.
So when you're...
That was an unfair diss at Cyberpunk 77, sorry.
Okay. That's not too unfair? Okay, all right.
It was a cheap shot. I apologize.
But I'm wondering, who is that person connecting those things, and what job is that?
It's actually one of the hottest jobs in game audio right now, without a close second. So as you get on larger teams, you get more specialized. The smaller teams, you wear more hats with fewer people. So yeah, that role between the composer or a sound designer and having the sound come out of the game is a role called a technical sound designer or a technical music designer. And their job literally is to sort of take the creative vision of let's say the composer. And the technical sound designer will have access to these specialized game audio tools that kind of make it easier to break a piece of linear music into these little segments or chunks or vertical layers and have them be reassembled in real time by the game. And the composer probably knows what those tools do and what they can do, but maybe aren't as facile with getting it done themselves because they have this person for them. And so the technical sound designer will then take the different stems, right? So that for the orchestral score, let's say it's broken into percussion, basses, brass, strings, winds, all as separate pieces of music that are rendered out. Well, the technical sound designer brings those into these tools, sets things up such that there's like a knob on it that is the intensity knob. And now it's this piece of music or this explosion sound that isn't just, explosion.wave and it goes boom, boom, boom every time. It's an explosion that has a knob on it, or a piece of music that has a knob on it. It's like, how intense is that explosion? Is it boom, boom, boom? So again, taking all those different elements, putting them together in a little package, that's part of the job of the technical sound designer. And then the technical sound designer also might be the person that goes into the code. All right, making explosion sounds is not good for your throat. Now they look at the code, they're like, okay, here's the code that's making the explosion. Here's the code that says how big that explosion is. Let me now hook that up. And so that's the role of a technical sound designer. And I know a lot of people, the people who have that skill, who can write some code, they don't have to be a computer science major, but have to know how to write some code and has a good ear and can talk with the composer and understand the C# minor 7 transition, making the harmonic layers add and talk music theory with the composer. That person is really in demand right now.
Wow. What are some other jobs that are kind of hot in the sound world now?
Sound designer, definitely. So a typical big budget game these days, there are fewer composers compared to sound designers. Sound designers at various levels, from junior to mid-level to senior to lead. The whole technical sound design thing that I just talked about. Dialogue is an entire specialty all its own. When you're doing dialogue for a game, it's not just, casting the voice talent and directing them in the studio. It's managing the fact that this product, this video game, let me say, by comparison, a typical motion picture, Star Wars, the motion picture, not the game, has 1,500 lines of dialogue, maybe 2,000 if it's, Lord of the Rings extended cut. It's a lot, but it's manageable. Star Wars, the game, has 218,000 lines of dialogue that then has to be translated into multiple languages. And so just keeping track of that is a specialized skill, and there are dialogue teams and dialogue tools that just deal with that. And how do you deal with when they're recording and you're in the studio and the actor's doing their lines and the actor has this great ad-lib that's not in the script, in the spreadsheet that is in front of you. And so dialogue is an area of specialty that if you really love dialogue and you really love spreadsheets, actually, if you're going to get into game audio, you have to love spreadsheets. You just have to. We live and die by spreadsheets.
Same in film.
Yeah.
So always love a good spreadsheet.
Yeah. One of my favorite how I got into the industry stories, it's a young woman, Monet Gardnier. I forgot where she graduated from, but she applied for a sound design job at EA Tiburon, which is the studio that does Madden and NFL, basketball, NBA. And so she got through the first interview, she got through the second interview, then they gave her a take-home sound design test. And a lot of it was just sort of simple, okay, here's some minute and a half long video, do sound design to it. But the other part was a spreadsheet thing. And it wasn't just straightforward spreadsheet stuff. It was like, how does this Excel spreadsheet connect with a Microsoft Access database backend, which is the system that they apparently use to keep track of all their game dialogue. And so she spent the weekend on Google trying to teach herself, how does Excel talk to Access? And she got the gig.
All right, well, spreadsheets.
So if spreadsheets are your friend.
I wanted to ask you
It's really unsexy.
Hey, I'm a fan of Excel. I know.
Yeah.
What other kinds of tools do you use in a day-to-day basis?
Besides Excel, which is the biggest, right? You're going to have a digital, as a composer, you'll have a digital audio workstation, and whether that's something like Logic on the Mac, I use Cubase for composition, Digital Performer. It's sort of what's your favorite, right? There's no right or wrong answer on that one. You typically also use another kind of DAW, maybe for crafting sound. And I mean, you can use Logic and you can use Cubase to do sound design, but they're really designed for music. So I use Cubase for music, and I use Reaper for sound design and putting sound to picture. Reaper is really, really popular in video games, in the video game space, more popular than the most popular film audio tool, which is Pro Tools. And one of the reasons that Reaper is really popular in video game development is it's very customizable, and you can write some computer code to have it automate things for you, or automatically rename things. And I was talking about the challenge of dialogue for video games. Right? You can't record 100,000 lines of dialogue without making mistakes. And so people have written these custom scripts. And again, these are typically the sound designers, the dialogue people, who were hired because they have good ears and good direction, but also because they have some technical skills. And so they, in some cases, they've written tools that the computer will go through the WAV file recorded by, in the studio by the voice actors. It will compare it to the spreadsheet of the script. It will call like a Google voice-to-text process to go, essentially try to map out in text what all those wave data means, and automatically match things up and cut things up, strip the silence. So Reaper is popular because you can do stuff like that. So whatever, we call it the pipeline, getting content from, somebody has the idea they want a new sound into the game is called the pipeline. So the fact that you can customize your pipeline by writing some code, which is why if you're thinking about working in games, having some coding skills is always going to help you. But yeah, so that's, Cubase, Reaper. We sometimes use these specialized game audio tools. There's one called Wise, spelled W-W-I-S-E. There's one called FMod Studio. There's some other ones. There's Elias, there's Fabric, there's CRI, but Wise and FMod are probably the two bigger ones right now. And they are dedicated tools written just for the game industry that allow you to take a piece of music and chop it into little bits and have it be reassembled by the game, or have bits of a crowd sound, a little cheer, a medium cheer, a big cheer, a boo, a big boo, and bundle it together in a way that the game can then say, hey, crowd, the crowd's getting more antsy, the crowd's getting more excited, the crowd's really bummed, the crowd's really angry, and doing that. In fact, I don't know if many people watch live sports, but in 2020, when COVID hit and football stadiums and soccer stadiums had empty stadiums, when you watched the game on TV, you actually heard crowds. That was done using Wise. So they took game audio technology. Again, the idea of game audio technology is how can I take, I know what the potential set of audio experiences might be. I know the moods the crowd can be in. I know what they sound like when their favorite player almost catches the ball but doesn't. Or when they do catch the ball at the end of a tight game, where you get all that sound into this tool, into this technology, and now they would have somebody running, they'd create a little thing with push buttons on it that controlled this game audio technology that actually made the crowd sounds.
Wow. Oh, I feel like it's so fascinating, because all these games, creative projects, football, films, as soon as you kind of get under the hood, there really is that just technical skill set that you need to be able to.
Yeah, you have to be able to sort
create.
of think logically, think like even if you never write any code, being able to think like a programmer can really help. Right? If you're a composer and you play some of the game and you know how you want the music to change, and now you can sort of think like a programmer. It's like, okay, yeah, when their health gets below this, that's when I'm going to add the ostinato strings to sort of bring a more sense of urgency to what's happening, or something like that. So yeah, the standard audio tools, like we call them DAWs, digital audio workstations, Cubase, Reaper, the game audio tools, Wise, Fmod, things like that. And then we also use video game engines, and the big ones are Unity and Unreal. And those are the tools the game developer uses to make their game. And so we incorporate these audio tools into those, or they have audio capabilities themselves, obviously. And now you're writing code to make these complex sounds happen. That's kind of what goes on in a current video game.
Okay. So those are a lot of the tools. What kind of hardware? I'm just trying to imagine like what your setup looks like.
Yeah, kind of. It's not too different than music, generation. All right, I have a Yamaha Motif keyboard because I like weighted keys. I have a dedicated computer desktop that I don't surf the web on. I don't do email, and that's my music workstation because you don't want random stuff to happen on that. I use music paper and a pencil a lot. So hardware-wise, there's not tons of. I mean, you can go to town on software, right? You can spend arbitrary amounts of money on audio software. There's a really robust industry, audio plugins and soft synthesizers and DSP effects, and I mean.
So, for someone who might be interested in, like, dipping their toe in, like, what would you recommend?
Dipping their toe in.
Like to do some sound design, or just to kind of experiment in this area. Like, what would I need to have at home?
So you need a decent PC. You want a PC that's capable of, well, if you're just doing sound design, sound does take up a lot of space, so you probably want to get a nice beefy hard drive, or solid state drive. Something like Reaper is very cheap. It's free to download. It's got an honor system where, if you don't pay for it, then a pop-up comes up saying, hey, why don't you pay for us? And I think it's like $80 for the student version and $225 if you're a pro. And they just use the honor system. So it's not that expensive to get into. There's a lot of resources out there. And if you search, you can find like free sound effects libraries. There are professional ones you can purchase, which obviously, if you're doing it for a living, you do that. They can get a little pricey, but you can get a lot of stuff online fairly inexpensively. And I would, just grab a video from YouTube or a little clip of your favorite game and bring it up into Reaper and try putting some sounds to it, and just, hey, explosion here. And there's lots of awesome video tutorials on how to do more interesting sound design than just, have boom 17 dot wave and use that. So.
I wanted to ask you, so I don't, kids out there, the Pixies. I don't know if you know the Pixies. Okay, yes, all right. They're a band. They're awesome. They covered one of his songs, which is, how did that happen? Like, did they ask you? Did you just discover that?
I actually didn't even know about it. So I was at Williams. That's the theme from the video game Narc, which is the one I did right before I left Williams. Apparently, Black Francis, the vocalist, was there in the studio, and he just played the game a lot on, I think it was the Nintendo at the time. And it's weird because Nintendo did a cover of the arcade version, which was my original song for the arcade version. And he just, for some reason, thought it was cool. And I had a housewarming party with some friends of mine, including at the company I used to work for. And Eugene Jarvis, I remember, just handed me this CD. So they had obviously contacted, I think it was Atari was the publisher of the Nintendo version, who said, no, you have to talk to Williams, who owns the rights to the arcade version, which is where the music came from. And so they did a license deal, I assume. And yeah, so it was in their complete B-sides and Planet of Sound.
That's pretty cool.
But it's not like Rihanna covered, but so they were a fairly big sort of alternative rock act in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, they're awesome.
And then they disbanded for a while, but they rebanded again, and they're touring now, I think actually.
They are, actually. Yeah, maybe they'll cover your song.
I always thought it'd be fun, like I don't know if they ever performed it live, but if they ever performed it live, it would be fun to like play bass.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
That'd be kind of cool.
Oh, okay. If you could go back in time and just give some advice to your younger self, what, like, you're starting off in your career, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or what advice do you wish someone had given you?
I should have had a better. Yeah, we talked about this before. Yeah, just don't be afraid to try different things, and don't get very tunneled into a certain thing. And I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I still wouldn't mind that. A good friend of mine is. But yeah, you just don't know what's going to go your way, and that. Actually, a couple of things. One, I didn't realize it for quite a long time, and that is, as you are young in your career and growing in your career, the people around you, they have careers too, and they're going to grow in their careers. And the importance of that network that just lasts your entire life is foundationally, not just professionally, but personally. And I met, my first day at Williams, I met a person named Ed Boone. And he had been hired like 3 months before me, right out of college. And we just got to be good friends. He became my best man. He went on to create the game Mortal Kombat. Oh. And that's what he's been doing for the last 35 years. He still runs Mortal Kombat. There's another guy, I met him, he was a cubicle programmer at a little 12-person video game company that EA had hired to do a Super Nintendo version of Madden, and so I got to be good friends with him. Well, he left that company and started his own company in Florida, which became Tiburon, which Electronic Arts then bought. And John went on to become like COO of Zynga, and then he was the senior vice president at Microsoft, and I knew him as this little cubicle programmer. And even I was in a wedding band in college, and actually later than college too, and I used to play with this drummer who was just amazing. Really, we used to put on our tuxedos and play Celebration. And he's been drumming with Styx for the last 20 years.
All right.
So the network of people that you meet they're going to grow and expand. And so the importance of not being a jerk and just being excited about other people's successes is really, really pays off. Yeah. And again, you don't realize that when you're in the thick of it, that these people around you are going to be your lifelong friends and collaborators. And
it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. I think one of the words you said earlier was serendipity, and just like how your career can be very serendipitous, and it's. Yeah,
there's the amount of, in other words, serendipity is luck, right? Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it takes a lot of work. There's not a substitute for putting in the work. But putting in the work isn't sufficient. You put in the work and you have to be kind of fortunate. I got lucky in that my sophomore year of college, the School of Music got $3 million to add computers to their music department. Right? Had I gone to a different school, it wouldn't have happened. I might have been a, tuba player. I don't know. So yeah, and not be afraid to take advantage of opportunities. That probably you were asking about going back. Put yourself into situations and don't be afraid of saying, "Oh, I wonder what if I did that." Right? I worked in college as an assistant for a jingle writer, and because I wanted to be a session player at the time, so it's like, hey, there's a jingle writer. I'm happy to make his coffee, or I actually wrote a computer program for him to help him with his job. But yeah, just don't be afraid to try something a little different. And again, I quit this job that I totally loved at Williams. I'd probably still be there. I probably would have, still been working on Mortal Kombat or something. But going freelance was the right thing for me, and it got me to, do a lot of console games that I would not have done. And I spent several years at Microsoft on the Xbox team that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, don't be afraid to branch out, and don't be afraid to sort of deep dive with multiple things too. I forgot who it was. I read a good blog article just on, there are a couple different ways you can be, quote unquote, successful. One is to be the very best at something, right? You can be Michael Jordan or LeBron James, or I say Russell Wilson, but I don't say his name anymore. And that's really hard. That's like, I want to play tuba in the Chicago Symphony. That would have been a really hard, could happen, but it's hard. The other thing you can do is to be pretty good, quite good, but not top tier, at some complementary things that overlap. So I'm a good composer, but I'm not at the level of Marty O'Donnell or Mike Salvatore or Gordy Hobb, right? The game composers that are spectacular. But I'm still pretty good. I'm not as good a programmer as some of the top Microsoft programmers, but I'm pretty good if I'm practiced. And so those two pretty goods ended up opening a lot of doors for me. So yeah, I forgot what shape would that be if you're like sort of W-shaped, right? If you go deep in a couple areas, that can sometimes be a really good way of getting doors open. And just again, we're talking about arts and technology. Mm-hmm. I think there's a reason that the technical sound designer is such an in-demand job. There's just not lots of people who are, again, we're not looking for, the top ace programmer at Google level programming. We're looking at, you can write some decent code.
Yeah. It's niche.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a very niche career, but if it's in demand, like, it could be very lucrative, and it could, keep you employed for a very long
keep you
time.
employed and get you meeting interesting people, and they can introduce you to some other aspect of something that maybe you didn't realize existed. Again, I wanted to be a session player. I was positive of that when I was 20. I couldn't imagine not wanting to play bass and then maybe playing tuba as a session musician. And then, nope, that's not what happened.
Do you still play bass and tuba?
I do. Actually, I've been playing bass as a session player lately. A friend of mine does a lot of music for Arc Nights. So I've been playing bass on some of his tracks, which is super fun.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You kind of come full circle.
Yeah. It's,
I love it.
It's easier now. You just do it at home.
Yeah. All right. I wanted to ask you, how can young people learn more about sound design, and are there any organizations or events that they can go to? Maybe you can talk about Game Sound Con. Yeah,
there are a few different ones. Here in the Seattle area, there's actually a pretty robust, active Seattle game audio community. If you search Seattle Game Audio on Facebook. Oh, there's nobody here probably on Facebook. Facebook's for old people, right?
Go on TikTok.
They're on Discord. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a Seattle Game Audio Discord server, which is the same group. They're on Facebook. They're on there's email. There's the Discord server, and they have about monthly meetups. We just had one at Gasworks Park a couple of weeks ago, so that's good for around here. There's lots of really good stuff online. I mentioned the company Wise, or the company's Audio Kinetic. The product is Wise with 2 W's. They have a whole series of tutorials and a set of certifications you can get. There are schools like we're here at DigiPen Institute of Technology, which has they have 2 sort of audio-related degrees. One is a Bachelor of Arts in Music and Sound Design, like if you want to be a composer or a sound designer. They actually have the other part of it too, if you want to be a computer science major, but specialize in digital audio. So if you wanted to either work at a game company as a programmer, not as the sound designer, or you could work at, kind of like Yamaha that makes synthesizers, or Isotope that makes DSP plugins. Those sort of resources here. I run a conference on game audio. We have it once a year down in LA, and it's 3 weeks from now, so I'm very stressed about that right now. It's called Game Sound Con. By the way, if anybody wants, we're in person and we're also virtual. And if you'd like to attend virtual, I actually created a discount code, PACE Live 2222. Will get you free access to Game Sound Con this year, which is in the 25th and 26th.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's 2 days of, we run 6 rooms. They're like 70 sessions, and we have the people from Sony talking about Ratchet and Clank. We have the composer for Deathloop talking about interactive music and kind of that, how do you stick square music into a round hole stuff before. So
well, that's great. And how long has Game Sound Con been
happening? 2009.
Okay.
So I think this is our 13th year.
Wow, congrats.
So yeah, I started that up. When I left Microsoft, I kind of had a couple of different pillars that I wanted to do. Music and sound design, education was one, because when I was at Microsoft, I spent a lot of time flying around and sort of teaching sound designers how to do interactive audio for the Xbox. And so I thought it'd be cool to kind of continue that. And I think it's probably again, my parents were music teachers, so I think that kind of was somewhere in the back of my brain. I thought music education would be kind of fun again.
That's great. I love this. I think we could open it up for questions. Does anyone have any questions here in the audience? Yes.
When you're writing music for video games, where do you find inspiration for creating something in like a specific environment? If you're in a space world, how do you think this is what it should sound like?
Okay, so the question was, when writing music for a game, how do I sort of figure out what I want it to sound like? If it's in space, how do I know what space sounds like? Or if I'm, I've done introspection on that, and I actually don't have a good answer to that question. My guess is it's just the synthesis of, all the stuff I've listened to, and again, I'm a performer, right? I like playing. So I always hear bass lines just because I play bass and tuba. But yeah, again, as I've sort of mentioned, for me, it always starts with the art, right? Look at the visual aesthetic. And that usually will give you a pretty good idea of where to go. A trap you can fall into is you start being cliche. I'm afraid I don't have a great answer to that. And I've tried to answer that question before, and I've never really had a good answer. Other than, I start with visuals and figure out what emotions you want to sort of project. And again, it's some of the best stuff sometimes comes from being in totally left field, what might be unexpected. And there are people who do that really well. I'm not one of them, but yeah, avoiding the theremin for sci-fi and things like that. You can stay away from those, but yeah, I might have to come back to that one.
Yeah.
I've been asked that question before, and I've never had a satisfactory answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, where do you find inspiration, and
Yeah.
where does it come from?
Yeah, I think it really is just the synthesis of all the stuff I've listened to. I grew up classically trained, so again, parents, a music teacher, so I grew up playing Baroque trio sonatas and also listening to a lot of Yes and Pink Floyd. So,
Do you think exposing yourself to all these different things just has been fruitful for you and your inspiration?
yeah, again, the kind of stuff I would generally get called to do is more thematic, where I would have to do different styles. And this is a big debate amongst composers. As a composer, do you say, this is what I do, and when people want this, they hire me because I'm better at this than anybody else? Or do you say, I'm a composer that I can do Dixieland, and I can do heavy metal, and I can do big orchestral, and I can do the Hans Zimmer thing, not as well as him, but decently. And I fall more into that category, but definitely, the top tier composers typically are like, this is what they do, and nobody does it like them, and so they get hired for that.
Let's see. Any other questions?
I do hear a lot of Chris Squire in my bass lines, because Chris Squire is the bass player for Yes, and unfortunately, I never got to meet him. I came really close once, but if I did, I would have apologized for all of the video game bass lines that were obviously very Chris Squire inspired. Yeah.
That's awesome. Sorry, you had a question.
What was your favorite project or game that you worked on?
What was the favorite project or game that I worked on? There are a couple. One was a long time ago. It's a pinball machine called Black Knight 2000. And Ed Boon, the person I mentioned, was the programmer on it. Steve Ritchie was the game designer, and he was also a guitar player, so he kind of came with his guitar. And that game was really fun just because we got very, very deep in the interactivity of it. The music was very, very flexible and could turn on a dime. And we had sound effects that would look at whatever key chord was playing at the moment in the background music. The sound effect would transpose itself to that key. The game would sit and wait for a musical boundary to continue, for things happening. And I could, from the musical score, I could cause the flash lamps on the playfield to light. And it was just a very good, complete package. More recently, it's probably Mutant Football League, which is, we're starting Mutant Football League 2 right now. And just because that's been a bigger project, it's on the bigger consoles, and I'm working with some additional musicians where I'm licensing in some music myself in addition to writing some, and I found that way more fun than I thought it would have been if you'd have asked me. So yeah, that's a good question.
That's great. Any other questions?
I'm curious about, you had the opportunity to work for the producer, and then you went freelance, and you more or less stayed freelance throughout. And so in current times, with all of the games being written, is it more likely that someone who's developing their skills is going to work as a core support person and build up, or are they going straight freelance and just trying to break into the different?
Okay, yeah, so the question was, if I can paraphrase, right, so I started as what we call an in-house employee. I was an employee of Williams. I got regular paychecks. And then I went freelance. I was actually freelance for about 8 years. Then I was in-house at Microsoft for a few years, and then I've been freelance for the last 13 again. And if you're starting off in this field, what are the career paths there? Is that kind of
Yes.
essentially it? There's a survey on the Game Sound. So if, as part of Game SoundCon, I do a survey of the industry every couple of years. And this is one of the questions I ask is like, are you a freelancer? Are you, what we call, again, an in-house composer? Do you work for a game company? Do you work for an audio company? And the industry is about 50-50. So it's about, and this, I think it differs a lot from film, where in film you tend to, certainly from the audio side, you're a freelancer almost all the time. And the film gets done, and you go in and you do it as a freelancer, and then you go on to the next project. Could be for somebody totally different. As opposed to, oh, you're an employee of Netflix as a composer. I don't imagine Netflix employs any composers as literal employees. So in the games, it's about 50-50. And so the smart move as a sound designer is probably to find an entry-level job at a company. I learned so much from my time at Williams because I was working next to the programmers like Ed and the designers like Steve and the artists, and you just learn about how games are made in a way that you can't really replicate. At DigiPen and some other schools too, right? We put students on interdisciplinary game teams. So you've got composers and artists and programmers and game designers and test people and so on, all working on a team together. And that's very, very good. It's the thing you should look for if you're looking at going to school for this. But there's nothing quite like what you will learn from being an employee of a game company. And then maybe go freelance from there if you find that happening. For me, I think that's why I left Williams. I kind of, reasons I won't go into, kind of got the entrepreneurial bug a little bit, talking with some people. And so I was like, yeah, going freelance sounds kind of interesting.
I have a part two to that question. Are there many internships in sound or sound design?
This is new. In the last even just 3 or 4 years, I've started to see game audio internships, which didn't exist 10 years ago at all. But yeah, Riot, Microsoft, Blizzard, Bungie, I think. So some of the big companies,
That's nice.
some of the big companies are starting to have internships. So you either over the summer or instead of your last semester of college, you are embedded in a company and you're doing the stuff that they do.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, that's kind of a nice, relatively recent thing. Right. It's more competitive because a lot of people want to get into it, but there seem to be more on-ramps. And again, if you want to turbocharge your on-ramp, you'll get some tech skills. So whether that means taking a community college course in C# or Python or something like that. Yeah, in the game industry, having some coding skills is just that little extra boost that might, again, I have friends who are audio directors and they're like, yeah, we have a sound design position open, we get 200 applications. And, if you want to make it onto the short list, it is all about what it sounds like, right? Your demo reel has to be good. But if your demo reel is good, it's going to be compared to a dozen other really good ones. And if you've got some of those extra skills, that can be really helpful. Just kind of like turbocharge you a little bit.
Okay.
Won't compensate for mediocre sound design, but it'll help. Yeah. Yes.
Is there anything that you wish the general public knew about sound design, or like a common misconception that you see?
I have a big pet peeve. And what a great question. The question was, are there any things about the game music or sound industry that we kind of wish people knew more about or misunderstood? My personal pet peeve is pinball machines have not gone ding, 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 ding since like 1982. And when I see a modern pinball machine in a TV show and somebody plays it and it goes ding, 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 I wish people knew that that makes no sense whatsoever. I get maybe why they do it. It's right. That's what sound designers are told pinball machines sound like, even though it's been 4 decades since they sounded like that. The other is sort of that game music is sort of bleeps and bloops. And one thing which we're really excited about is that this year, on February 5th, 2023, for the first time ever, there is a brand new Grammy category called Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media. And so, yeah, the Grammys are finally recognizing video game music. There was a score so a bunch of us lobbied, like going back 20 years, I've been trying to lobby the Recording Academy to recognize game music. And the closest we could do was they added video games as being eligible in the film and TV soundtrack category. They didn't even call it video games. They just added the words "or other visual media" to the film and television category. And in 2012, the soundtrack for the video game Journey was nominated in that category. It lost out to the film soundtrack, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but at least it was some recognition. But this year, a video game score is going to win a Grammy.
Who votes on that?
Members of the Recording Academy.
Okay. That's
So,
fantastic.
so, and that's so in terms of getting the word out that game music is not chiptunes.
Bleeps and bloops.
Bleeps and bloops, yeah. That's something that we're very happy about.
That's great. Any other questions? Yeah.
Has the shift in games being like mostly on discs to nowadays being on, like you can download anything like on the internet now, like any game, has that really shifted like what you can do and the limitations of that?
So the question was, has the fact that we don't no longer, for the most part, ship games on physical media, discs, and we just download them, how's that sort of affected audio? It has, largely because we are always fighting in games and this goes back before I started in games, fighting with memory. That's whenever I mentioned that the big breakthrough was just going to a bigger disc, moving from CD to DVD. When games are downloaded now, yeah, we can have a game with 300,000 lines of dialogue. You couldn't have that on a game with discs. Or you can continually have, again, a game like Destiny that is constantly updating itself and constantly has new content. So it's been very good for just, the amount of new content that we can put into games, which is, good for sound designers and composers, that there's lots of stuff there. And it's good for, you can not have to compromise so much on the aesthetic decisions you have to make. Because again, even with a DVD, sometimes you'd have to choose, oh man, we're going to have to, not include this music we wanted because they have another cutscene video that they want to add, and it just won't fit on even the DVD anymore. Well, that kind of goes away for all intents and purposes. Now, there is a practical limit, right? You don't want a game to be like a 4 terabyte download. That would suck for everybody. Although, 10 years from now, that may be commonplace. Or, more likely, games will just be done in the cloud than having downloads anyway. So yeah, having more memory is definitely, and I associate being freed from the constraints of a disk as essentially unlocking, mostly unlimited size, which means we no longer, again, have to compromise so much. Like I said, a lot of the compromises we have to do in game audio are around, do we have enough compute power to do what we want to do? Do we have enough memory to do what we want to do? Don't have that problem in film.
Yeah, well, linear.
In linear media, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you think game audio will evolve with newer technologies like VR
VR was awesome. VR, I sort of thought of as the game audio employment technology of the 21st century. So the thing with audio for VR that is really interesting from an audio perspective is, one, its importance increases a lot. And I've even, talked with, people like John Carmack, and it was the CTO of Meta, Facebook Meta, the VR stuff that Facebook does, Meta does. And to hear them talk about audio in the same breath as they're talking about their visuals, that didn't really happen to the same extent in even, surround sound gaming on Xboxes or PlayStations. And part of that is the amount of detail you need to put right into the visuals and the sound now both to create the kind of immersion that they want to achieve, that they envision having, requires a lot of detail. And it's detail that we, it might be in the top AAA console games, but even that was an exception to the rule. And an example, a silly example, is suppose I have a VR experience and I've got some dialogue. Well, one of the challenges is if I really want a realistic interaction with you as a human, as a virtual human character in VR space, if I'm right next to you, I'm going to kind of speak with a softer voice. And if we're about 12 feet, 15 feet apart, I'll probably talk about like this. If you're on the other side of the room, I'm going to need to project my voice a lot. And now if I'm trying to program an AI character that sounds natural, no matter how far they are away from me virtually, oh my God, it's like, my poor voice actor has to have like 9 different versions of every line. And you multiply that by, just the amount of detail when you are physically, tactily taking a virtual thing and placing it down on the table and creating these sounds. If they don't really closely match what you expect to hear with the kind of subtlety and variety of when you're manipulating things with your hands directly, you expect them to behave in different ways depending upon what you're doing to it. And if that doesn't match, then the immersion is lost, it's broken. And so VR, part of it's cool because there's all these cool technologies, with spatial audio and making a sound like it's behind me and stuff. But the ability to have the kind of almost infinite subtlety of sound it's a lot of work to do that, which a lot of work means that's good for sound designers. Mm-hmm. So it means we have to both create a lot of content, and now it pushes us to create better technologies to cover these situations that we might have otherwise said, hey, if I record 2 or 3 versions of, crackling water bottle, that's probably fine. Well, that's not going to cut it in VR. So yeah, VR had this really big interest, and then it kind of was waned a little bit, but it's definitely there simmering in the background, and audio is a big component of it.
Any other questions? All right. I don't want to break your voice.
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you though.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today, Brian.
It was a blast.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to thank PACE Performing Arts Center Eastside for having us. And
don't forget, if you go to GameSoundCon.com, it's the GameSoundCon website, PACE Live 2222 for online pass to GameSoundCon this year.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
It was really nice talking with you.
Good deal.
Good.